Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Maureen Dobbins. I'm the Scientific Director of the National Collaborating Center for Methods and Tools, and I'm joined today by Megan Racy, who will also be giving us a user story about the tool that we'll be talking about today. So welcome to everyone who has joined us on the call. We're really excited to be able to talk to you today about the Effective Public Health Practice Project Quality Assessment Tool for Quantitative Studies. Interestingly enough, I was involved in the early development of this tool, what seems like a really, really long time ago now, in the early days of conducting systematic reviews. So it's great to have the opportunity to talk to you further about this tool today. So just a little bit of housekeeping for those of you who may be new, not joined us before on the Spotlight webinar. We do ask you to post questions and comments into the question and answer, and that you use the question to all as opposed to privately to the host. And that is just so that everyone, if it's about the content that we're discussing, then everybody will be able to see those questions, and then we will respond to those if needed throughout the webinar, and then we definitely have a good amount of time at the end of the webinar to go over those questions as well. So just remember to post to all and not the host. And if you are experiencing some connection issues during the webinar, we do recommend you use a wired internet connection as opposed to wireless. Our experience is that seems to work better if you're actually hardwired. And if you're having ongoing connection issues, you can try the WebEx 24/7 helpline. There's a phone number there that you could give them a call. If you are having a specific issue around that, you could send an email just to the host, and we'll try to do some troubleshooting with you as we get going. And I will apologize, I'm actually just getting over a cold, so hopefully my voice will hold out for the whole webinar. Following the webinar today, as with all of our Spotlight webinars, we do post the PowerPoint slides from today in English and French, and we are also audio recording the webinar, and that will also be made available to you. And here we've just posted where the PowerPoint and the auto recording will be posted following today. So we actually also, for our webinars, really try to engage you. So we have a few polling questions that we will ask you to respond to. So as many of you would know, we do like to evaluate the webinars as a knowledge translation strategy, and sometimes folks join on their own, and sometimes they're in a room with other colleagues, and so just responding to this gives us a sense of, at the end of the year, how many people participated in all of our webinars. So I'll just give you a couple of more seconds to finish that, and just for those of you that I'm seeing the data in real time in front of me, so the very large majority of you are joining just on your own, a small number with 1 to 3 folks, and a few more with 4 to 5. And actually one group that actually has 6 to 10 people. So that's actually, and another with more than 10. So that's really exciting to see, and welcome to all of you that are joining in these different ways. So we're just going to move on now to, we actually, I think we're just about to close that so that we can move on. And so again, this webinar series, Spotlight on Methods and Tools, is brought to you by the National Collaborating Center for Methods and Tools. And the purpose of this webinar series, because we do hold more than one type of webinar series at NCCMT, but this specific set of webinars are to identify methods and tools, so different resources that exist in the Registry of Methods and Tools here at NCCMT that that are important tools for public health professionals to know about, to assist them in their work of including evidence the best available evidence in public health policy and practice. So we use a variety of ways to identify the types of tools, and we certainly encourage all of you to send us in suggestions of methods and tools that you would like us to cover in a Spotlight webinar. We have been holding these monthly, and we're certainly interested in hearing from you other thoughts you have on tools that we haven't covered in the past. So again, today the quality assessment tool for quantitative studies, and really just a look at if you are doing a rapid review or a systematic review, it's providing some guidance in terms of assessing the quality, the methodological quality of the different kinds of quantitative studies that you may come across with respect to answering a question, for example, around the effectiveness of a public health or health promotion intervention. As just a little bit more background information, there are 6 centers. There are 6 national collaborating centers across the country, geographically located on the East Coast in Antigonish, Nova Scotia. We have the National Collaborating Center for Determinants of Health. In Quebec City, we have NCC for Healthy Public Policy. Of course, we're located in Hamilton at McMaster University. And then as we head west, we have in Winnipeg, the NCC for Infectious Diseases, and then 2 in British Columbia, 1 in Vancouver, which focuses on environmental health, and then in Prince George, we have the NCC for Aboriginal Health. The overall goal of the NCC, the National Collaborating Centers for Public Health Program, is to help support the use of the best available evidence across these various domains into public health practice, programs, and policy. And specifically for the NCCMT, so NCC for Methods and Tools, our specific mandate is to help develop and support the capacity to use the best available evidence in public health practice, policy, and programs. And we do that in a variety of ways. One of the key resources that we've developed over the past 8 years is the Registry of Methods and Tools, which is where we house those methods and tools that are relevant to knowledge translation and evidence-informed decision-making. We have searched the world for these methods and tools and where they are relevant and appropriate and practical for use in public health. We've identified those and put them within this online, freely available registry. Then we have a variety of online learning opportunities. So some of you may be aware of the online learning modules that we have available that can be accessed by anyone to develop their knowledge and skill in evidence-informed decision-making. We offer a variety of workshops that are generally tailored to the audiences that have asked us to conduct those workshops. Public Health Plus is a repository of newly published public health evidence that meets a certain level of quality, and it's a way for practitioners to stay up to date on the newly emerging evidence in public health. This would include single studies as well as systematic reviews. So it's a very, very quick way in a particular field to stay up to date. We also have a variety of multimedia resources, which include videos that we've made available on different concepts related to research and statistics. And then, of course, we're trying to connect folks across the country who work in public health. And so, as we travel across the country and interact with public health folks from coast to coast to coast, we often hear that many folks in public health are grappling with the same issues, whether they're in St. John's or Vancouver or other areas in the country. And so as we learn about those, we try to connect folks so that they could work on things together, or perhaps someone's already done, let's say, a review of the literature, and another health unit has an issue, we try to connect them so they can share that information as well. So in a nutshell, those are some of the key things that we try to provide across the country in public health to help support evidence-informed decision-making. So I'm just going to move us on to a second polling question, which asks you to consider how familiar are you with the method or tool that we are discussing today. So this tool of how to appraise quantitative studies. Are you familiar with the tool? Have you heard of it before, or have you used the method? So I'll just give you a few seconds to complete that. And again, it's looking like so far the majority of you have heard of this tool. About a third are not familiar with the tool, and then a small number have actually used the tool, which is excellent to hear. And if you have comments as well, definitely would like to hear comments from you later in the webinar on that experience. I'm just going to take a quick look here. I haven't been monitoring any of the kinds of questions that are coming out. Looks like everything's okay. So I'm just going to move us on now to moving on with our discussion for today. So this is myself, the scientific director, and then Megan, who is going to be giving us the user story, who's a PhD candidate from the Department of Human Health and Nutritional Sciences at the University of Guelph, and we're really excited to have her with us here today. So the Effective Public Health Practice Project, which started many years ago, actually I think we can say decades ago now, in the early 1990s, is when a group of folks at the Hamilton Health Unit started looking at conducting systematic reviews, evaluating different types of, at first, public health nursing interventions, and then was later expanded to public health interventions more globally. And as some of you may know, a number of those reviews that were conducted also have gone on to influence some of the activities that public health is still doing today. So the Effective Public Health Practice Project was, since 1999, has conducted 35 systematic reviews. It then also creates knowledge dissemination materials, so thinking about how do we distill the information in a systematic review out to the health professionals for whom that review is applicable? How do we get those reviews done as quickly as possible to address emerging issues? How do we assess the studies for methodological quality? And how do we integrate all of the findings from those studies to come up with suggestions for practice in public health? So it started out as the Effective Public Health Practice Project, and then was later established. We established at McMaster the McMaster Evidence Review and Synthesis Center, which was funded by the Public Health Agency of Canada as a center that was conducting reviews relevant to primary health care and public health that was then feeding that evidence into the development of practice guidelines. So today we're going to be focusing on the quality assessment of the studies that go into the systematic reviews. It was developed for use in public health or for public health related studies. So those of you who read public health literature, have been involved in conducting research in public health, are involved in doing program evaluations in public health, know that it's a very difficult area to do research in. It doesn't always lend itself well to doing randomized control trials. There's issues of feasibility. There's ethical issues around randomizing interventions. There are issues around blinding. So there are many issues that come into play in conducting public health research that make the tools that are developed to assess the quality of randomized control trials not necessarily the best tools to evaluate public health studies that do not use a randomized control design. So the tool was developed in response to that. So it's suitable for both public health researchers, practitioners, and policymakers. And it's also developed so that it will be done independently by two reviewers. So you would have a study, you both go off, you critically appraise the study, and then you come together to discuss your assessment and then to come to consensus if there were any discrepancies on your ratings of the various components. And so that's what we'll be discussing in depth today. There's been a couple of publications if you want to learn more about the tool. So the first one published in 2004 by Helen Thomas, a process for systematically reviewing the literature, and then a subsequent study published in 2010, and it actually, very interesting study here done by some folks associated with the Cochrane collaboration, but assessing the difference between the Cochrane collaboration's risk of bias tool and the effective public health practice project quality assessment tool. So both of them really nice papers to read to give you a little bit more background on this tool. So the tool looks at 8 different areas. And so each area has a number of questions that are assessed, a number of criteria that are assessed to then provide an overall methodological rating. And there's also a guide that's been developed that provides detailed information on the kinds of information that the reviewers should be looking for in the published study, and how, based on that information, how they would actually answer the questions in the tool. And so we'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. And then a dictionary of terms, so definitions that are relevant to each of the components, also helps to increase the inter-rater reliability of the tool. So if we have 2 different people, we want them to be very, very clear on what each criterion is asking for and what kind of information they would look for, and also based on what information, how they would then answer that question. So a lot of information provided to ensure that once everyone is understanding all the components, that we would have good agreement across multiple reviewers of this for the same study. So just jumping into now the first section. So in the tool, the first section that you are asked to look at is selection bias, and we have 2 questions here. The first question asks us, are the individuals selected to participate in the study likely to represent the larger target population? So in any research study, we know that we are going to sample a small group of participants in the hopes that they actually represent that much larger population for that particular issue, so that in the end, the results that we generate from this small group are generalizable to the larger population. And so we're asked here to consider in the ways in which the researchers have gone about to solicit participation in the study and how people are selected. Are they very likely, somewhat likely, not likely, or can't tell to represent the larger population? So we're asked to provide an assessment on that. And then we also want to know in question 2, what percentage of selected individuals agree to participate? So do we have 80% and above, 60 to 79% agreement, or less than 60% agreement? It's not applicable because it was a type of design that isn't measured. Some studies, for example, might not have told us how large the denominator was, so we really don't know. And there's some policy studies that are like that, policy interventions. So it could be not applicable, or there could be a can't tell. Some studies just don't tell us what percentage of the population actually agreed to participate. So we're asked these two questions. The guide would provide us more detail on how to answer those questions. And then based on our answers for 1 and 2, we come up with an overall rating for this section as being either strong, moderate, or weak. Moving on to study design. So here we have a series of questions that we're asked to consider. So the first one is indicating the study design. So you can see them listed out here. We have our randomized controlled trials, controlled clinical trials, a cohort analytic, a case control, cohort, which is a one group where then we measure them before and after, interrupted time series, or there's another type of design. The second question was the study described as randomized? We answer yes or no there. And if yes, was the method of randomization described? And we would get some help in the dictionary about that. So really important here, what we know is that it's not good enough to just say that participants were randomly allocated to intervention or control. Really, the researchers need to tell us something about how that randomization was conducted. There are better and less good ways to do randomization, and we should have the opportunity to assess that in the write-up, and really saying that it's really not acceptable to say, well, there was a really short word count in the publication, therefore we left that out. We're talking about a sentence here of a small number of words to give us that description of how the randomization was done. So this could be a computer-generated random numbers table, for example, as one of the gold standards for doing the randomization. If they have told us that they described the randomization method, then our next question is, was the method appropriate? So have they used really the best type of randomization for the setting and situation that they were in? So based on all of these questions again, we would give this section an overall strong, moderate, or weak. As we move on now to our confounders, so here we want to know if the researchers have done a good job in controlling for items that may explain an impact of the intervention that has really nothing to do with the intervention. So are there differences between the groups on variables? Let's say age was really important, or gender was really important, or other types of characteristics. We want to know that the researchers have assessed whether or not there were important differences between the groups prior to implementing the intervention. And we also want to know that they've assessed what those important confounders were. So here, in much of the public health literature, race, sex, marital status, age, socioeconomic status, education, health status, pre-intervention score on an outcome measure, these are all items that in most public health studies would be important confounders to be addressed and measured. Of course, in particular topic areas, there may be other very specific measures that you would also want them to have assessed pre and then again post. But definitely at the beginning, at baseline, we'd want to know about those. And then our question 2 is if there were important differences, indicate the percentage of relevant confounders that were controlled for, either in the design, in, let's say, stratification. So if we're looking, for example, marital status, if we felt that might have an impact, then we're going to want to make sure that our groups have equal representation of the different marital status that we could identify. So we want to get a sense of whether we do that in the design or whether or not, if we've identified important differences between the groups, that then we control for that in the analyses that we do on the statistical side of things. So this is asking the reviewer to consider of all the different confounders that may be at play here for a particular issue, what percentage of those were controlled for, either through the design or through the analysis. Is it between 80 to 100%? Is it 60 to 79, less than 60%? And then again, we come up with an overall rating based on how we answer our two questions. With respect to blinding, so we know that blinding is very important in terms of its impact on the intervention. So we want to know if, at a minimum, the outcome assessors were aware of the intervention or exposure status of the participants, and then were the study participants aware of the research question. So this is very interesting and very complicated in terms of how we design our studies that are relevant to public health. Of course, you know, oftentimes we cannot blind study participants to whether or not they are receiving an intervention, and that's why that question is not asked here. But we, at times, can do our best to mask what exactly the study is about. So while a participant may know they're receiving an intervention, they may not be fully aware of what the exact outcomes are we're looking at, which then may provide a little bit more objectivity in terms of if they're also providing like a self-report, for example. We also know that in many instances, the participants themselves are providing the outcome data. So it's a self-report, and that's where, again, that question number 2 becomes even more important if it is a self-report, that participants not be aware of what the exact research question is. Sometimes we're lucky enough to be able to design the public health studies where we actually have outcome assessors who are observing the outcome, and ultimately what we would want to know is those assessors do not know what the status is. So they are blinded to whether or not the participants have received the intervention or not. So again, here we come up with an overall rating depending on how we answer those questions. Our data collection method, so again here we're talking about reliability and validity. So our first question, were the data collection tools shown to be valid? And our options, yes, no, and can't tell. Very many times in public health research, we're not quite sure. A lot of information might not be provided on the validity of a particular data collection tool. But one of the things to be looking for here is what have the researchers told us in the paper, in the published paper, about how they ensured that the tool was collecting what it's meant to be collecting. And has it been tested? If it has been tested for validity, what are the findings of that? Has it been tested on a similar group of people that we want to, so has it been used in a way on a similar group to what the study is using it for now? Those are the kinds of things that we would be looking for. And then we also want to know if the tools are reliable. So if the tool is administered on multiple occasions, barring nothing changing, we should get the same answer over and over again from that tool. So what we're looking for here in a write-up of the study is that there is evidence to show validity and reliability of these of the measures, and particularly as it relates to the outcome measures is what we're interested in here. So if a tool had if the data collection tool was valid and reliable, we would say that it's strong in this case. If we were saying no or can't tell, that's when we would say weak. If we said that the tool was valid but not reliable, that would move it into a moderate type of rating there. The next component, F, is withdrawals and dropouts. So were withdrawals and dropouts reported in terms of numbers and or reasons per group? So again, we want to know, that there's they've accounted for why folks may have dropped out of a study. So have they actually told us, in addition to the percentage, do we know why people have dropped out? Is it related to the intervention? Is it related to moving away? So there's lots of different reasons why folks would drop out of a study, and we want to know that they've actually provided us with that information in the write-up. And then we also want to get an indication of the percentage of participants that completed the study. So if we have 80 to 100% completion rate, we're most happy with that. If they that would be very, very high participation rate and considered strong. If it's between 60 to 79%, it's still acceptable, but starting to be a bit concerned. Would there be something systematic about those that dropped out that makes them different from the ones that stayed in the study? And if less than 60% completed the study, we would want to know that, and we start to become a bit more concerned, again, about the generalizability of the results to a larger population when you have less than 60% completing. Sometimes, again, we don't know. They don't tell us what that participation rate is, or as in the example here in a retrospective case design, case control design, where it's not, you know, there isn't a dropout rate. There's just there's really only a participation rate in a case control, so that would be not applicable. We also want to look at the intervention integrity. So here we want to get a sense of what percentage of participants received the allocated intervention or exposure of interest. So did folks get the intervention the way we wanted it, the way we intended it, or the way the researchers intended it to be delivered? And did they get all of the intervention at the right intensity? Was the consistency of the intervention measured? And the final question here is it likely that subjects received an unintended intervention? So we call that contamination or co-intervention that may influence the results. So is there something else that could have happened? Was there another intervention going on more broadly that folks could have received information? Is it likely that folks between the two groups may have interacted with each other, and therefore those in the intervention group may have shared information with the control group? Those are the kinds of things that we want to assess here. I see that there are quite a few questions that are coming up, and we will come back and go through these a little later on in the webinar. In our next component, we move on to talking about the analyses. So we want to look at the unit of allocation. So how were folks really, what unit were they randomized to? Is it individuals randomized to an intervention or control group? Is it a practice setting or an office? So this could be primary health care teams. We might allocate by the primary health care team, everyone in that practice to an intervention and everyone from another practice to control. Is it at an organization or institutional level? This could be when we think about school-based research. Is it schools allocated and all the students within a certain school will receive an intervention and others would be allocated to control, other schools? Or is it even at the community level? So we have communities that may be randomly allocated to receive an intervention or not, or in a cohort design, we have something happening within one community, and then we compare a different community that isn't, let's say, implementing that type of intervention. Then we want to know, once we know what the unit of allocation is, now we want to know what the unit of analysis is. So technically what we want to be looking for is if participants have been allocated at the individual level, then they should be assessed as individuals in the analysis. Or if it's been allocated at an organization or institutional level, then they should be analyzed at an institution organizational level, not at an individual level. So it's asking for consideration of whether or not the unit of allocation and the unit of analysis are at the right level. So question 3, are the statistical methods appropriate for the design? Yes, no, and can't tell. So we want to make sure that We've assessed that the types of methods that have been used in the statistical analysis are appropriate for the type of study design. And then our final question here is the analysis performed by intervention allocation status? So again, as I was getting that, if you've allocated at a organizational level, then are you analyzing at that organizational level? And again, here our answers are yes, no, and can't tell. Many times, sometimes it isn't completely clear. We're looking for the researchers, authors to have told us exactly what they've done here. Although, you know, sometimes by looking at the analysis, we might be able to get a sense of how that was done. So I'm thinking here maybe it would be a good idea to, before I move on, an opportunity to go back through some of the questions that you've posed as I've gone through that. So I have a question, how would you rate if they answered no to the randomization question? So actually what I'm just going to do is take us back here a little bit. Are the individuals, no, so here we go. Was the study described as randomized? So here it's going to impact, if we said a controlled clinical trial, was the study described as randomized, and here we would say no, then the overall assessment we would give here would be a moderate, and actually I'm thinking we're going to need, yes, provide me with this. So we're just grabbing the dictionary as well. But that's how we would assess that. And now there's another question. If the author used a randomized control trial and a randomized control block, but still there is unbalance between groups. So that's a great question. And some of the things that, again here, and that's going to be our next question here, is if they had controlled for it in the analyses that there is an unbalance between the groups, then we would give them a strong. If they recognize, if they used the RCT or randomized control block, there was still, but they recognized unbalanced, the groups were unbalanced, and then did not control for that in the analysis, that would likely end up being moderate. And I'm just quickly just clarifying this with the, I want to make sure that I'm being true to what's in our dictionary here as well. And I don't want to hold us up, so maybe we'll keep looking for that and then come back to that question. Okay, let's see what else we have here. We have a question now, and it's in relation to how can evaluate this part. I'm not sure now. This is very close to the question above, so I'm assuming that this is going to be in relation to that. How do we assess this part? And so if I'm getting the question properly, it's around, if it's around the list of confounders. So one of the things that definitely helps is when you work in a certain area, you become more knowledgeable of the factors that exist that have been proven in the literature to be important for that particular condition or issue. And so you would be drawing on that kind of knowledge of what are important confounders, in addition to the ones that we've added here. So the list that's provided here on this slide, race, sex, marital status, age, SES, education, I mean, those are basic ones that likely impact on most issues we would come across in public health. But there could be some more specific ones that likely you would be knowledgeable about in a particular area that you work in. So the next question is, for participants' rate, can we extract the answer from the flow chart of the study that showed all information of participants? And yeah, so there's different places that you may go to to find that information. It could come from the flow chart. It could potentially come from numbers that are provided in some of the data tables if they give us baseline and follow-up rates. So sometimes you might have to do some of the calculations yourself in order to be able to assess if you've got an 80% above or less than 60%. So yeah, sometimes you might need to do the math yourself. Moving on to a few more questions here. The Cochrane collaboration discourages the use of scales for assessing quality or risk of bias. Reviewers are rather encouraged to assess 7-8 domains of risk of bias in a more qualitative manner. What is NCCMT's view on this? So this is a great question, and you are definitely correct that a number of years ago now, the Cochrane collaboration developed a tool called the risk of bias, and it is assessing many of the factors included in this tool, and then each factor is assessed for being at low risk of bias, high risk of bias, or can't tell, and they do not provide an overall rating or scale or quality for a particular study. This tool does provide an overall assessment for each study that would suggest, based on pulling all of these items together, and they are all considered of equal weight in the final scoring, to give an overall assessment of that study as being, of the methods being strong, moderate, or weak. I'll point out that this tool, the Effective Public Health Practice Project tool, isn't an NCCMT tool. This is a tool that was created to conduct systematic reviews and is a tool that is within the Registry of methods and tools. But I guess what I would say in the interaction that I've had with public health professionals is that they are looking to looking for an overall assessment of whether or not a study is good enough to inform practice. And this is a type of tool that allows them to once all of the criteria are assessed, to give them that type of a rating. So I feel it does provide professionals with something that doesn't necessarily come out of the risk of bias that may be of use to them. So I'm going to move on from that. Another question is, sorry, I'm just scrolling, make sure I have the whole question. I struggle with identifying all confounders possible when critically appraising articles. Therefore, I was wondering how could this be captured if the researchers fail to acknowledge confounders? So what's important here is, for example, let's say we were looking at a study where the question was evaluating the effectiveness of breastfeeding promotion interventions. And let's say they did a randomized control trial around an intervention to promote breastfeeding. So some received the intervention, some didn't get anything more than what one would be exposed to during a pregnancy and their interaction with various healthcare professionals, and the intervention group received something very specific about promoting the benefits of breastfeeding. And let's say the researchers did not assess socioeconomic status as a variable, and let's say and not we, but the literature illustrates that that is a very important component to intervention, to breastfeeding. If the researchers didn't do that, didn't assess that variable, but we believe it's a very, very important one, and it could be that then SES is not equally divided between the two groups, and then they don't control for that, we may have concerns about how much trust we can put in those findings if that was an important variable. So what would end up happening here is if we as the user with knowledge of important confounders on a particular topic see that that hasn't been assessed and or controlled for, then we would mark this study down if we ended up with many, like multiple of those types of variables that aren't controlled for in the design. So that's how we would use that there. So if there were several that weren't confounders that weren't assessed and or controlled for, then we would end up giving this a weak type of rating for this particular factor under confounders. So I'm moving on now to another question that was raised. Many public health studies use a cluster randomized control trial. It is my understanding an RCT choice would be inappropriate. Is that accurate? So I'm going to try to read between the lines here. So many questions that we have would be in public health that are done within a setting. For example, school-based research. And so we then have, you know, it would be very, if we did a study in a school and we randomized classes, some classes to receive their intervention and other classes not, we would very likely end up with another problem of co-intervention, right? So those kids getting the intervention may speak to those kids not getting the intervention, and that may impact our outcomes. So generally in school-based research, we actually randomize at the school level. Well, the kids that attend, the understanding would be that kids who attend a school would be more similar to each other in how they may think and act and behave than the kids in a different school. So when we do that study, we need to take into account those similarities in the kids by school. That's what we would refer to as a cluster randomized controlled trial. So the issue becomes, if we're doing this type of research, and we don't analyze it as a cluster randomized controlled trial, then we're actually, we are introducing bias in terms of the way in which we do our analyses, because it isn't, our analysis isn't accounting for the fact that kids in one school may respond more similarly than kids in another school. So we need to embed within our analysis something that takes that into account to give us a more conservative estimate that is more likely getting at the truth for that particular outcome. So I think that was, I hope that's what the question was in relation to there. Okay, so another question that's come in, the Cochrane collaboration, okay, so that was the one around the question I was just answering around giving an overall score. So I think we may have answered all of those questions. I'm just, yep, I think I've addressed all of those. So now let's move on. I'm going to take us back to where we were here. So once we've looked at, once we've provided an overall rating for the first A through F, and if I actually just go back here for a minute, these last two items here, intervention integrity and the analyses, are not considered in the overall score. We collect data on these two items, but we actually don't include that in coming up with our overall assessment of the methods of the study. But we pull that out because it may help us in our interpretation of the findings and into the discussion of the paper. So for sections A through F, we then, the dictionary tells us, depending on how we answered overall items A through F. Then that tells us how we would go about assigning an overall global rating of strong, moderate, or weak to those. So for example, I'm just looking quickly here, not provided. Actually, I think I have it down here. Sorry, it's the next slide. So this here is what we would tell us a strong rating would have none of the, so across selection bias, design, confounders, blinding, data collection, and withdrawals, a study would could have no weak ratings to be a strong. A moderate could have one weak rating, be rated as a moderate, and a weak would be anything that has two or more weak ratings. And I'm just going to have this looked into a little bit more. There should be something more around here. I'm thinking if we have a situation that had two strong and four moderate, there's no weak ratings, but that would end up being a moderate. So maybe we can just look into that. How many strong do we need to have in order to end up with a strong rating? I believe it's probably something more like 4 strong and 2 moderate, no weaks would result in a strong. 3 strong, 3 moderate is likely going to end up being a moderate. These are some additional information we can look into and post with the materials for today. And then the last thing that we also look at across the ratings is when the two reviewers come together, is there a discrepancy between the two reviewers with respect to the component ratings A through F? So we want to know overall, did they disagree on, let's say, study selection, or in the design, or in the confounders? And then we want to know the reasons for that. Was it an oversight? Was it a difference in the interpretation of the criteria that's coming from the dictionary? Or is it a difference in the interpretation of the study? So when pulling the material out of the article that we have that we're reading, the two reviewers interpreted that differently. And then they come together to discuss any differences that they have, and then based on their discussions, come up with a final overall rating for the article as being strong, moderate, or weak. Sometimes what can also happen is if the two reviewers can't come to consensus, we can pull in a third reviewer who can look at it again, and then, in essence, break the tie there in terms of coming up with an overall quality rating. So I'm just checking here, make sure we don't have any final questions. Your comment, there's another one here, and your comment relating to the number of strong ratings is in Thomas's paper. Yes, thank you very much. And yes, you would be able to find that in there as well. And we have one question here. I'm using the EPHPP tool this time. I really struggle with answering the first part, Part A, selection bias. I answered Q1 was 2 and Q2 was 1. Then the answer here should be moderate. Is my answer correct? All right, so I'm just going to take us back up to there for a minute before we move on. So we're here, the first part, Part A, selection bias. So for question 1, you said it's somewhat likely, and Q2 was 80 to 100% agreement. And I'm just looking at this right now myself. And you are correct. So based on the dictionary, if we have somewhat likely for question 1 and 80 to 100% agreement for question 2, we would say that that is moderate. So that is correct. And then one more question before I turn it over to Megan is, I've struggled to identify strong and moderate rated studies due to challenges in selection criteria where most participants self-select and in terms of blinding challenges. This limits studies included in the review. Is this common? So there's a couple of things, there's a couple of ways in which you can deal with this. That's a great question. We could, so one of the things that Cochrane would also suggest is that we not use the overall rating to eliminate moderate or weak quality studies. So again, keep in mind these would be two of the 6 components. If they did really well on some of the other criteria, again, keep in mind the overall rating, you could have 1 weak and still be included as a moderate if you've done if the other components are rated well. So it doesn't automatically kick you out. If you ended up with both of these items being rated as a weak, you have some decisions to make there in that you could include the weak studies in your review, and then you look across the quality. So are you finding different findings for the weak quality studies versus the strong quality studies? It's a bit more work, not a bit, it's probably a lot more work because you might end up with more weak studies than you have for strong. But that's one of the ways in which you can do that. We have to keep in mind that all of these criteria, depending on the rigor with which they're done, do impact the confidence we have in the findings. So while I completely understand and agree that there are definitely challenges in public health research that make blinding in many instances impossible to do, or in being able to demonstrate that the population is representative of the target population, those things do impact our ability to say with confidence that the findings are generalizable to a broader population, or that the findings are in fact really valid. So it's still thinking about, when we think about evidence-informed decision-making and what that means, we're talking about making decisions based on the best available evidence that we have at that time. Maybe methods continue to evolve that would allow us to, implement some other types of designs that would help us address these types of issues as well. So I do understand the issue. It doesn't mean that we can avoid them and not consider them in terms of what impact not being able to be as rigorous on these items, what impact that actually has on our results. Okay, so I'm going to move forward now and ask Megan to take over and to talk about her group's experience of using the tool.
All right. Hello, everybody. So my name is Megan, and I'm really pleased to be here to give the user story side of this tool. A lot of the questions that you've had so far and a lot of what Maureen's already talked about and some instances or caveats related to the tool are things that I actually went through and experienced with using it. So just to give you a bit of context of why and how I use the tool, I just wanted to give you a really quick overview of my overall PhD research. So my research focuses on knowledge translation and transfer, so more specifically how to best communicate foods for health to adolescents. So as part of my research, we implemented a nutrition education intervention. So improving the success of nutrition education interventions relies on careful planning of their design and feasibility of their evaluation. But in comparison to the literature that exists on how to evaluate interventions, there's little to actually guide researchers on how to best develop interventions that are practical, logical, and evidence-based. So as part of the process to develop our own nutrition intervention, we conducted systematic reviews that were to identify characteristics of effective interventions related to our target audience, the food group we were focusing on, and the study setting, which was in schools. So the intervention we developed, which I have a little screenshot of the website there, is called Why Dairy and Alternatives. And the purpose of our school-based intervention was to motivate pre-adolescents to increase their intake of dairy products and alternatives to better meet recommendations by changing their knowledge, intention, and behavior. Great. So this is actually the systematic review, which informed our intervention development, in which we actually use the quality assessment tool. So effective interventions are needed to address the reported inadequacies of dairy product and calcium intakes among adolescents. So this review investigated interventions aimed at increasing adolescent dairy or calcium intake and determined the characteristics that were associated with these successful interventions. So we had a PRISMA systematic review search that identified 17 different interventions over a 22-year period. Studies were evaluated for population, delivery, dietary targets, and outcome measures. And we also measured intervention intensity, the use of behavior change techniques, intervention effectiveness, and effect size, and the overall quality of the studies. So we found that 12 of the 17 interventions were effective, meaning that they significantly changed in a positive way dairy or calcium intake. And we also saw that effective interventions tended to be higher in intensity, meaning that they were longer in duration and were reaching more participants and had a more intense intervention overall. But in looking at the quality of the overall interventions and using the quality assessment tool, we found that effective interventions tended to have higher methodological quality, while the majority of ineffective interventions were qualitatively assessed as weak. So that is unique in research, where you don't always see that the better studies are also qualitatively better. So the table presented here is just an excerpt of some of the studies, and the quality assessment is provided there. So on the very right side, you can see our quality rating, whether it was strong, moderate, or weak. In terms of quality assessment, overall, a majority of our interventions scored as moderate, followed by 5 of them which were weak, and the remaining 4 which were strong. So of the studies effective at creating a change in behavior, so actually modifying dairy and calcium intake, 50% were scored as moderate and 33 were scored as strong. In contrast, those ineffective studies, 60% of those were weak and 40% were moderate. So it is notable that the most effective studies in our review were qualitatively scored as strong and moderate, and then the ineffective ones were more so moderate and weak, which suggests that stronger study designs and outcome measures result in interventions that can be shown to be more effective. But this analysis and my experience with this, which I'll talk about next, also demonstrates that more accurate reporting of the methods and results are needed in all areas of research, but specifically this one, because some studies might have been scored as weak or didn't do as well with the tool because that information wasn't available. So the next, what I'd like to talk about is why we actually chose this tool, because a question came up about the Cochrane quality assessments and their reviews, and they have a tool as well. But there's a few reasons why we specifically, my group and I, chose to use this tool. So first off, our experience and familiarity with the tool. So I have my advisory committee who presented a different number of tools that we could use, but basically we had more experience with this tool. We had a member of my advisory committee who had used this tool before for systematic reviews and meta-analyses. As well, we saw that it was the ease of use. So after looking at the different tools that were available, and looking at the websites and what they provided with the tools, it was user-friendly, it was simple, and it also contained detailed steps of use. So we thought that that was a lot more user-friendly and easier to use than some of the other tools that existed, which required a bit more interpretation. It was very clear format with the sections laid out and the dictionary that was provided added for clarity of the terms and the items that we were doing the quality assessment on. As well as easily accessible online, which is great. You don't have to have any subscriptions to get to it. Everything's available through the website. It was easy to find and to get the support for what we needed. As well, there's provided references that support its development, which was nice to look at to see how and why it was developed and how it's been used. Obviously, as well, it was applicable to our research area, being public health, human health, nutrition topic area of our review. And as well, it was practical. So it was evidence-based. It was a practical approach to evaluate the quality of intervention programs with the goal of using these results to inform my own intervention development. So overall, as I said, my experience was that it was really easy to use and user-friendly. What I ended up doing is, for my systematic review, we printed off all 17 studies and then used this quality assessment. We printed off 17 copies of it and used it almost as a cover page for every single study, so that as we were reviewing the studies, we had the hard copies to be filling out the dictionary and actually circling every single number and keeping track of this for our own resources and referencing back as well. The dictionary was by far the most useful resource that was provided with the tool, especially when we had to discuss discrepancies and disagreements between the two researchers that used it. So the dictionary was also, as I said, one of the reasons why we chose the tool. Other tools didn't provide this. And a lot of the issues actually arose due to a lack of reporting of intervention specifics in the study paper, so it had to do with researcher interpretation. So the tool is reliant on what information is provided in the paper by the authors, and we found it helpful to try and look for supplemental information, researchers' websites, and we even reached out to the researchers whenever possible. And while we didn't often get a response from them, and this information was difficult to find, we knew we tried to cover all of our bases. So as I said, due to the lack of information provided by authors at times, the tool required some researcher judgment in making decisions on what information was provided. So one of the hardest decisions we had to make using the tool was whether it was not applicable in that item or you can't tell. So it wasn't always obvious if that item wasn't applicable for that specific study or intervention, or if the information just wasn't provided by the researcher, so we were able to tell. And so some of the items of the tool also required a bit of extra separate researching to ensure we were accurate with our responses. So as we've talked about the statistical methods, whether that was used appropriately was something that, while you're familiar in that area of research, you want to be sure that they did use the right tools and methods. So you have to kind of do a bit of researching and background work on that. But overall, after using the tool and reflecting back on it, we used the tool almost 4 years ago. And looking at the available resources that were provided to use it and talking about it here today, it was really an easy process to use, and we were pleased and happy that we chose this tool over some other ones that we tested out originally. But yeah, back to you.
Great. Thanks, Megan. That's excellent. So what we're going to do now is open it up to some additional questions. You may have some for Megan just around that user experience, but I'll also take this opportunity there are 3 more questions that have come in. So I'll start with those, and then we'll see if there's any other questions for either myself or Megan. So the first question is, what if the study has mostly validated tools, but one of these is misused to study a condition inappropriately, leading to one inappropriate conclusion that the authors claim to have measured something they haven't, but the rest of the study findings are good. So, yes, I mean, you know, I feel like what I say most of the time for anything related to evidence-informed decision-making, the answer is it depends. There's lots of it depends going on in terms of the folks that have developed the tool have really tried to do their best to come up with all of the potential scenarios, but likely that isn't going to be 100% of them. So in this particular instance here, in terms of our data collection tool, and I'm actually going to just take us back to that. Here we are. Were data collection tools shown to be valid, and were data collection tools shown to be reliable? And so again here, I mean, this is an all or nothing, a yes, no, or can't tell. I think we generally would say that if the majority of them are a yes for validity, we would give this a yes. Where I would have you know, written notes on my my data collection tool in the days when I did it the way Megan just described, which is a printed copy of the tool. I would have written on there either the tools that were valid for those outcomes, and then potentially only extracted data on outcomes of valid tools, or perhaps made a note of the tools we were concerned about in terms of not being validated tools or being used incorrectly. And we may still pull out the data, but maybe we would have made a decision with the team as to whether or not it didn't make sense to report on those. Or third option, you still report on it, but you would discuss within your discussion the issues, the validity issues, and other, if it in this case wasn't appropriate to be using it, you could discuss that in the discussion and what that means in terms of that particular outcome. So those are a couple of different suggestions that I would have for that. Another question is, can you comment on the applicability of this tool to assess cross-sectional survey studies? So that is a really good question. I'm going to take us to that likely here. So the first thing to keep in mind here is what is a cross-sectional study able to answer for us in terms of a design. So this tool is primarily used to assess studies that have a question around the effectiveness of an intervention in a quantitative way. And they have those designs listed here. A cross-sectional survey would have many limitations to it with respect to being able to assess the effectiveness of an intervention by the very nature that it's one snapshot in time of a group. So in this instance, if you were to use this tool to assess the quality of a cross-sectional survey, it's likely going to, not likely, it will come out as very weak. Most items, I would think here, maybe not all, but most items would likely end up being rated as a weak. So one, I would suggest, if you want to know about intervention effectiveness, cross-sectional is not the design that's going to answer that question for you, or it would have so many limitations in that design, you likely wouldn't want to be using that to answer that kind of a question. Therefore, it wouldn't be appropriate even to be using this tool on that type of a design. Next question, in interrupted time series studies, confounders won't be assessed as there is only one group. Does this not applicable study impact on the quality assessment when compared with two-arm trials? So it will impact, it has the ability to impact. If we look under design in the dictionary, it will say that a interrupted time series as a design would be rated as a moderate. So you would still have a moderate here, and then under confounders, which is here, we could say, I mean, I guess here it isn't really so much can't tell, but it would be more around not applicable, which this would still end up, I would think, being rated as a moderate. So it won't end up, it wouldn't end up being as high as a two-arm trial that has assessed for differences and controlled for them. That could end up with a strong, and here the best time series would end up as a moderate. Okay, one question here. I recognize this tool was designed for use with public health interventions research. Can you comment on its use or appropriateness for use in assessing research within other realms or settings, so acute care, drug trials, etc.? I think the tool has broad applicability to other areas. It's really thinking about areas where randomized controlled trials are not very, I don't want to say easy, none of them are easy to do, but where there's many, many, many issues that would get in the way of doing a randomized control trial, and so you're likely to see a lot of designs that are your cohort studies, before-after studies. It's where you end up with research that isn't primarily randomized control trials, that a tool like this brings in a little bit more of those realities within that type of research. If you only were to use a randomized control tool, then all of the research would come out. Any other designs would look very, very weak. So this allows a little bit more of those realities of doing research. However, and so there might be many interventions, for example, in acute care that, again, are very similar. You can't blind it. It's not ethical, it's not feasible, things like that, this tool could definitely be used to look at a variety of types of designs. Drug trials is an interesting one. Many drug trials, I suppose, may lend themselves a little bit more easily to placebos, where you can have blinding and where you likely can be doing a randomized controlled trial, and in that instance, using, let's say, for example, the Cochrane risk of bias tool would likely be more appropriate. So I'll stop there. Are there any other questions that folks have in relation to the tool in general, or to, for Megan, in terms of that user experience? I'm kind of looking in a couple of different areas. I'm just reading one here, sorry for the silence. So we had someone say, let's say a study has a fairly high rating overall methodology. They've used validated tools, for example, but an error is used to describe what the tool measures, therefore causing the study to claim findings about an outcome that it actually didn't measure. Okay, I think this was what we were sort of addressing in a question before. I mean, I think you need to be careful with that. So it is you know, as the users are doing a systematic review or a rapid review, it is trying to make sure that there is a good alignment between the tools and what those tools are supposed to be measuring and what you are looking for in your outcomes. And so you need to be cautious there if they are actually using a tool for an outcome they shouldn't be using it for, and whether or not you know, how you would use that data after the fact. Another part of that says, can you report on and rate the study outcomes that were well done while dismissing the outcome that was misreported? So yes, and the only thing that you want to be careful here is that then you determine that that's what you're going to do and what the reasons are if it's misreported, or you know that it's the wrong tool to measure a particular outcome. Like you, optimally, you would identify these things ahead of time to say, if in fact we find this is what we're going to do about it. What you want to just be careful about is that you don't end up down the path of, well, we don't really like what the finding was for that particular outcome, so now we're not going to report about it. So it's distinguishing between being very clear that you have processes in place that would not allow that to happen by saying, well, they didn't use the right measure for that. So you just would want to be really clear. And it's probably a bit abstract to talk about it in this way without like a real example, but it could probably happen much more easily than you think, that we tell ourselves, well, we don't, you know, that measure isn't correct, and that's why it has given us this erroneous outcome, therefore we're not going to report it. So you would just want to be really, really clear in a write-up of why you made those decisions, how you made those decisions, and what you did about them. Okay. So a couple of other questions here. Let's see. As you just mentioned, RCTs are not always the most appropriate design. In this case, why is the type of design given different weight? Well, so that's a great question. I'm sitting here, so how many things can I say to really get myself into trouble? At the end of the day, the most rigorous way to evaluate effectiveness is through an RCT design. That is what gives us the most confidence in the finding, that the finding is actually getting at the truth for that particular phenomenon. As we move down in design, meaning as we become less rigorous by, one, not randomizing, then no matter what we do, there is still bias being introduced to the design that reduces our confidence that the finding actually is really getting at the truth for that phenomenon. So that's why even within this tool, the RCT is still considered, for that particular item, for that particular component, the RCT is still weighted higher than other designs. However, that isn't to say that, we have randomized control trials that would not do well on selection bias, that maybe didn't do well on confounders, don't blind, and don't have good data collection methods. That trial could still end up being rated as a moderate or even a weak if they end up with other items that haven't been done well. So it's not to say that and I've done a number of systematic reviews. I've used this tool in the past and have seen many trials that end up being rated weak. And then we have other types of designs that if they have done well on other items, might be rated overall higher than some of the RCTs that we come across. At the end of the day, when we write up our review, it's really being able to discuss what are the strengths and limitations of the body of evidence, and then what impact do those, let's say, limitations have on the confidence we can have in those findings. And that's where we need to have a fulsome discussion of what we know, knowing that there are likely many areas in public health that an RCT isn't something we can ever do. So here's the best of what we have, and this is what we think we can make of that based on knowing what the limitations are. Okay, another question, any suggestions that you have for approaching the step of discussing discrepancy between reviewers to the component ratings, particularly if there are differences in interpretations of the study? Yeah, so that's, again, a really, really good question. This is where you might need to broaden the number of people that are doing the review, so having a third person, potentially even a fourth person. And in fact, a really good review likely brings people that have come from different perspectives, different philosophical underpinnings. This will result in a robust discussion around ratings. Doesn't make the process easier, but likely helps have a really fulsome discussion around that. And in the end, I think the most important thing is that you would discuss ahead of time, before doing any of the work, how are you going to resolve differences. If two reviewers just really cannot come to a consensus, then what process do you want to have up front? So are we going to bring in a third person? Are we going to have two different people do it? Those are the kinds of things that you would want to have set up, what we call a priori, so before you would start doing it. Megan, do you have any suggestions?
Yeah, so I think in our experience, we did have two reviewers who had slightly different backgrounds in terms of their expertise. And as well, we found it useful by printing off. I know it seems old to be printing things off, but that's how we worked best. So by printing off the full tool for each study. We were able to sit there and actually go through exactly why we had selected whichever ratings we had. We flagged it actually in the study where you could find it. So by printing it off, you know, we had little sticky notes of here's why I decided that they did control for confounders or not, for example. So that led us to sometimes, you know, you did miss something that was written in the study, and other times it was a misinterpretation. And that was, again, why having the dictionary, the full resources, was useful to go back and really make sure we were both interpreting it the same way. So we always made sure to come to an agreement based on, like, overall what we both thought was the right interpretation. But it was difficult, and we didn't have the option to bring in any other reviewer. So between the two of us, we made sure we were both satisfied with the decision.
Great. Thanks, Megan. And I see one other question here at the bottom, a good one as well. The tool does not evaluate the discussion and conclusion section of the study. The study might be well done, but the authors may draw on other research or belief systems to present the results and develop conclusions. So yes, yes, you are right that the tool ends with assessing the methods of the study that may impact on their findings, and it doesn't go so far as to then evaluate whether or not, or to come up with a rating on whether or not the data really substantiate the conclusions of the study. We do find those types of criteria in, for example, the AmStar tool that assesses the methods of a systematic review. And it is one here. I mean, it technically isn't a methodological question, but it is a very important one, and one that as a user of the evidence we need to be looking at very carefully is, and that's why I always tell all the students and public health professionals I interact with, is they need to look at the tables and the data themselves and make their conclusion about what they think the data is telling them, and then compare that to what the authors say, because certainly we have seen that in published research that the authors may take a slightly different spin on what the finding is, depending on, you know, where they're coming from within that. So that is a very important issue. Okay, I know we're just about coming to the end of our time here, and we have a question here which we'll see if we can get to. If a stepped wedged RCT design is used and the randomization is by the location of the intervention, but the analysis is by the individual response, is this still a good quality RCT? Great question. And so a few things here. Stepped wedged RCT design, not everyone might know what that is. Certainly this is a newer type of design we're hearing more about in health literature, and this is where everyone gets the intervention, but you're randomized into when you get it. So there may be those, for example, there's a set of schools that start the intervention first, and then the schools that weren't randomized to the first group act as the controls until it's their turn to get to the intervention. So there's kind of a couple of things going on here. It's around, you know, the stepped wedge likely has some other additional criteria that need to be assessed in doing that type of approach. We still do have a problem here, whether it's step wedged or just regular RCT or cluster randomized. If they allocate at the school level, but they analyze at the individual level, we still have a problem there. And so it likely, this particular criterion, if they've done that, they're going to likely end up with a moderate on this criterion. They could still end up overall being assessed quite good if everything else has been done really well, but on this particular item being rated a little bit lower for. Okay, so I'm just going to move us. I think we have a couple of final slides to do here. So thank you. These have been excellent, excellent questions. We have a question for you. Could this method or tool be useful in practice? So we're asking you to comment on very useful, somewhat useful, not at all useful, don't know. And I'll just give you a moment to complete that. And right now it's looking for really the majority of you that have answered that yes, this would be very useful and few somewhat useful. So thank you for that. And we'd also like some feedback from you. So we'd like to hear your thoughts on today's webinar. There's a short survey that's available at this link. We'll provide that to you. Really will only take a few minutes for you to share your thoughts on what you liked. Is there anything else we could have done that would have helped in the presentation of the tool today? So really value your feedback, and we use that feedback to continually tweak the process of our webinars. And then a final question for you around what are your next steps? So you can click as many of these as apply to you. Are you planning on accessing this tool? Are you thinking about reading about its summary on the Registry of Methods and Tools, considering using this tool in practice, or telling a colleague about it, or telling a colleague about it? So if you could just let us know what you're thinking are going to be your next steps based on learning about this tool today. It kind of looks like it's many of them, so many are thinking of accessing it, reading about the summary to learn more, considering using it, and also telling a colleague about it. So that's, thank you for that information. And then finally, just telling you about our next webinar. So coming up on Wednesday, November 23rd, this is a hot off the presses brand new resource created by NCCMT, and it's mapping to the core competencies for public health, resources that the NCCMT has available to help folks develop competencies in areas that they may feel they need to know more about. So this will be an online tool that will be launched in the coming weeks in English and French that would allow you to look at each of the competencies and within each competency, sub-competencies, and from that identify resources that we have here at NCCMT that would help you attain those competencies. So whether they're online learning modules or videos or other types of resources. Just the link below there tells you allows you to register for that webinar. We'll hope that you'll join us on November 23rd. And for more information about the NCCMT, you can contact us at either visit us at the website or contact us at the email address below. And barring anything else from anyone, we'll let you go. I see we've kept you a few minutes longer, but we've really appreciated your time today and your questions and your comments. And we look forward to hearing from you again in future webinars. So take care, everyone. Bye-bye.